news program coming to you live from Algiers with me, Miriam Zian. The headlines. On Black Thursday, tens of thousands of French citizens took to the streets against government austerity plans. Widespread public and political demands are being made for social and tax justice, while unions threatened escalation, warning that the protests are a clear message to the Prime Minister. Coming up next, on the 713th day of the war of extermination in Gaza, Israeli forces escalate massacres as their ground incursion widens. Al-Qassam warns the invasion will bring more Israeli dead and captives. And in Syria, the UN envoy called for an end to Israeli interventions and the lifting of international sanctions on Damascus. Algeria urged all relevant parties to halt destabilizing actions in Syria, while Shibani discussed lifting sanctions on his country during talks in Washington. Hello and welcome back to the details of your nightly news. First, France witnessed massive protests on Thursday that brought cities and vital sectors to a standstill, with hundreds of thousands taken to the streets against government austerity policies. Workers from transport, education, and health joined the rallies, forcing most schools and universities to close. Unions said over 1 million people demonstrated nationwide, well above the expected 600,000 to 900,000. The protests came 8 days after the Let's Shut Down Everything movement, which drew more than 200,000 participants, marking a new phase of opposition to France's economic policies after the 2022 pension reform protests. This morning, a number of French demonstrators voiced their anger at what they described as the authorities' contempt for workers and public services, calling for social and tax justice.
We organized the protest at 5:30 a.m. to denounce the government's contempt for workers. The reality is that the workers today are seen by this government and by President Macron in particular as a marginalized and despised group. This is no longer acceptable.
I am here to defend public services, to demand greater social and tax justice, and in particular to emphasize that public money should be directed to supporting public services in hospitals, courts and schools, rather than ending up in the coffers of large corporations or being given as tax gifts to the wealthy.
In at Thursday's demonstration, Sophie Binet, Secretary General of the CGT, said it is the French street, not the government, that has the right to shape the state budget. She criticized President Emmanuel Macron for trying to deflect popular pressure by changing the Prime Minister, stressing the need for a real policy shift rather than cosmetic adjustments. Marie-Lise Léon, head of the CFDT, echoed the call, urging stronger trade union unity, demanding genuine tax justice and rejecting austerity policies.
The anger is immense, the determination as well. The message I want to send today to Mr. Sébastien Lecornu is that the streets should be the ones to write up a budget. And if this is not the case, Mr. Lecornu will end up on the streets. Emmanuel Macron, to escape this dynamic, told himself, well, let's change up the casting, let's switch prime ministers. But we're not stupid, we're not fools. What we want is a change in policies.
It's important for us to be all together. All trade unions are in this protest, and we have just a message to the government. It's no austerity, and we would like taxation and justice. It's very important for the workers. To the government, well, the ball is in your court. You know that today the world of workers has an extremely clear message. We are waiting for an answer, and so it's up to you to let us know on which points you would like to make progress.
And from the early hours of Thursday morning, security forces began dispersing gatherings and attempts to block roads using tear gas, particularly in Marseille. As in the September 10 Let's shut everything down protests, around 80,000 police and gendarmes were deployed across France, supported by 24 armored vehicles and 10 water cannons. French media reported disruptions in public transport on Thursday morning, especially in Paris, where authorities limited metro and suburban train services to rush hours only. France is boiling again for the second week in a row. Massive protests have swept the country. This time, dubbed Black Thursday, people are furious over austerity plans, a deepening economic crisis, and what many see as President Macron's failing leadership. Marwa Belaiwar has the details.
For the second week in a row, France's streets have been packed with anger. Hundreds of thousands turned out again, this time in what unions called Black Thursday. Their chants were loud and clear. No to austerity, we're tired of paying crushing taxes. The protests are aimed squarely at incoming Prime Minister Sébastien Lecornu and his plan to push through new austerity measures as the country battles a worsening economic crisis. Schools shut down, transport paralyzed, industries disrupted. The movement is biting hard. And with the EU pressing Paris to slash a budget deficit already several times higher than the bloc's average, the pressure is mounting. Macron's government have tried and failed 5 times in his second term to solve this puzzle.
The key question amid this enormous political pressure is, what kind of government can truly meet these demands? That is what matters. Just think of the pension reform at 64, pushed through without parliament. I must underline that again. What we are witnessing today is a major breach of our political course. Lecornu will achieve nothing, and that was entirely predictable.
Even police crackdowns and threats from outgoing Interior Minister Bruno Retailleau haven't kept people at home. 10 days into Lecornu's mandate, he looks no closer to finding a way out, while unions hold firm, saying they won't give up their social protections just to balance the books.
It's important for us to be all together. All trade unions are in this protest, and we have just a message to the government. It's no austerity, and we would like taxation and justice. It's very important for the workers. To the government, well, the ball is in your court. You know that today the world of workers has an extremely clear message. We are waiting for an answer, and so it's up to you to let us know on which points you would like to make progress.
Now, with opposition voices calling for new elections, Macron's clinging to shaky alliances in parliament, and more sectors threatening strikes, the crisis is deepening. Analysts warned France won't find a way forward in Macron's fragile formula, one that's becoming more and more vulnerable to the pull of the far right.
The French daily Le Monde reported that Paris is facing a lawsuit for failing to prevent the ongoing genocide in Gaza under the 1948 Genocide Convention. The Association of Jurists for Respect of International Law filed a comprehensive claim with the Paris Administrative Court this September, seeking a judicial declaration that France has breached its obligations. The move follows the International Court of Justice finding of a plausible risk of genocide in Gaza. Le Monde added that the pro-Palestinian rights groups accuse the French state of inaction in the face of the continuing war of extermination. Moving on to news about occupied Palestine. Palestinians were killed and others injured by Israeli gunfire and airstrikes targeting civilians in various areas of the Gaza Strip since dawn Thursday. Medical sources in Gaza hospitals reported that 48 Palestinians were killed and others wounded in air raids carried out by Israeli warplanes since the morning, including 9 in Gaza City. This comes amid intense ground and aerial bombardment, along with the destruction of residential buildings and neighborhoods across several areas. The World Health Organization has warned hospitals in Gaza are on the brink of collapse, amid Israel's intensified offensive. WHO Chief Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus has said military incursions and evacuation orders in northern Gaza are causing new waves of displacement and creating inhumane conditions. UN Secretary-General spokesperson Stéphane Dujarric said continuing attacks on Gaza forced more than 40,000 people to flee in just the past 2 days. In a press briefing, Dujarric confirmed that around 40,000 people fled southward on Monday and Tuesday, adding that Israel has issued new forced evacuation orders for residents within the next 48 hours. And for Gaza's residents, displacement is no longer a choice but a necessity for survival. Entire families have fled from the north to the south, clinging to hopes of an immediate end to the war's agony and a chance to return to homes from which they were driven. Usama Ayadi has the story.
The dream of returning home despite the total chaos imposed by the Zionist war machine haunts those who are forced out of their homes, unwilling to abandon them. Palestinians are shouting as loud as the deaf can hear that they are the owners of the land. Their steadfastness and refusal to leave their own lands in the face of the murderous entity has spiraled another wave of sporadic killing and relentless bombing of every living being in the blockaded strip.
This is not a displacement journey, this is a death journey. From everywhere, to be honest. First, one is leaving one's land. In the end, we are in Gaza, Gaza residents. We were near the south. We were near our homes. The dream of returning was close, that a deal would happen, and that we would go back. Now, it feels like we will never return. Death is everywhere, we just escape it from one place to the other. And only Allah knows our fate. Life is hard and our situation is indescribable. I left Gaza and my heart was weeping in blood. My wife, daughters, and I were crying as we bid farewell to our place. Gaza was our home. We are bidding farewell to our home, our lives, our memories.
Palestinians unanimously agreed that their displacement southward was the worst decision that they ever made, but the hope of returning home made them forget, even only temporarily, the pain of being away from their own homes. Civilians in Gaza have been subjected to successive disasters, whether massacres, starvation, displacement, thirst, or disease. The occupation has used every means of genocide to torment them without succeeding in breaking their determination.
It is a feeling of sorrow and pain. It is the beginning of another series of suffering. We went through dreadful experiences, having been displaced several times. It is exhausting. Our life has become hellish.
Facing two bitter choices, either flee south or die by bombardment. However, this didn't take long for them to discover that these two options are two sides of the same coin, death or martyrdom. What is happening in Gaza is not just a Zionist crime against innocents. As grave as their suffering is, the Palestinians affirm their steadfastness in an epic struggle that embodies all the meanings of patience, faith, and adherence to the land.
Hamas's armed wing, the Al-Qassam Brigade, said Israel's entanglement in a war of attrition will cost it more dead and captured soldiers. In a statement on Telegram Thursday, the brigade said their fighters are ready to send invading soldiers to their deaths, stressing Gaza will not be an easy prey. They warned Israel will not recover its captives alive or dead, given that the resistance does not prioritize their lives. 4 Israeli soldiers were killed and others injured Thursday in a roadside bomb explosion in southern Gaza. Hebrew media confirmed that at least 4 soldiers were killed and 8 others wounded, some critically when an explosive device targeted a military Humvee in Hamas in Rafah. Hamas called for escalating global solidarity with Gaza against Israel's aggression and what it described as a crime of genocide and starvation targeting more than 2 million besieged people. In a Thursday statement, the movement urged that the coming Friday, Saturday, and Sunday be marked by marches of anger against Israel and its supporters, a unified voice demanding an end to the aggression, the opening of crossings, and lifting of the blockade. The United States used its veto on Thursday evening against a draft resolution in the United Nations Security Council calling for a ceasefire in Gaza. The draft resolution received the support of 14 member states, including the 10 countries elected for 2-year terms, but Washington's use of the veto led to the project's rejection. The resolution proposed by 10 member states of the Council calls for an immediate and unconditional ceasefire in Gaza and the release of detainees. Algeria's permanent representative to the UN, Ahmad Ben Jama, strongly criticized the United Nations Security Council for its failure to make practical decisions to lift the blockade imposed on Gaza. Algeria's permanent representative to the UN stated that despite these sincere efforts, the Security Council has not provided any help to Palestinians because the occupation is protected and escapes accountability.
Forgive us, because famine now spreads in Gaza, and this council could not stop it, could not even act to denounce it, because this council could not halt your forced displacement, and because aid, humanitarian aid, is turned into a weapon. And this council, this very council, could not break the siege of Gaza. Forgive us, because the world speaks of rights, but deny them to you, Palestinians. Forgive us, because our efforts, our sincere efforts, shattered against the wall of rejection.
Ahmad Ben Jama reaffirmed Algeria's steadfast support for the Palestinian cause, recalling President Abdelmajid Tebboun's pledge that Algeria will stand by the Palestinians until they achieve an independent state with Al-Quds as its capital.
Palestine is for the Palestinian, and Algeria, as President Abdelmajid Tebboune has vowed, will never abandon them. Not until the establishment of Palestinian state with Al-Quds Sharif as its capital.
Spain's Attorney General Alvaro García Ortiz has ordered an investigation into possible human rights violations in Gaza, citing the gravity of events and the rise in death toll from Israel's ongoing war. Spanish media said the probe will examine whether Israel's action amount to serious breaches of international law. Meanwhile, in the UK, government sources reveal that London is preparing to formally recognize the state of Palestine in the coming days, likely before next Monday's UN General Assembly, foreign ministers' meetings, and following US President Donald Trump's return from his official visit. The UN Special Envoy for Syria, Geir Pedersen, said the country needs international support and the lifting of sanctions imposed on it. During a Security Council briefing on the situation in Syria, Pedersen called for an end to Israeli interference in Syria's internal affairs and for full respect of its sovereignty, independence, and territorial integrity. He also stressed the need for a roadmap to resolve the crisis in Sueda.
Syria urgently requires international material assistance on a scale commensurate with its needs and ambition. We need to see the private sector's footprint back in Syria, including through nurturing Syria's domestic private sector to ensure that what exists survives and thrives. To achieve this will require more support from the region and the wider international community, and sustained sanctions and export control relief, reassurances to banks and companies, and an accelerated path of domestic reforms.
Algeria's permanent representative to the UN, Ammar Benjama, stressed that foreign intervention in Syria only serves to worsen its fragile situation. In his speech on behalf of the A3+ group, Benjama called on all active regional and international parties to refrain from actions that could lead to further destabilization in Syria, as he described it.
External interference can only aggravate Syria's fragile situation. The A3+ calls on all regional and international actors to refrain from actions that could further destabilize the country.
And in the same context, Algeria's permanent representative to the UN condemned the Israeli military operations in Syria as a blatant violation of international law, stressing that the occupied Syrian Golan remains an integral part of Syria under Security Council resolutions.
We strongly condemn Israel's military operations, which constitute a blatant violation of international law, including Article 2 of the United Nations Charters. We also call for the full implementation of the 1974 disengagement agreement and recall that the occupied Golan Heights is an integral part of Syria.
And on Thursday, Algerian President Abdelmajid Tebboune, Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces and Minister of National Defense, chaired a meeting of the Supreme Security Council, according to a statement from the presidency. And in other news, US President Donald Trump said Russian President Vladimir Putin has let him down over negotiations aimed at ending the war in Ukraine. At a joint press conference with British Prime Minister Keir Starmer, Trump said the war in Ukraine would have been one of the easiest conflicts for him to resolve given his relationship with Putin, but that the Russian leader disappointed him.
The one that I thought would be easiest would be because of my relationship with President Putin, but he's let me down. He's really let me down. It was going to be Russia and Ukraine, but we'll see how that turns out. But that turned out to be, I thought it might be among the easiest of the group.
And for his part, UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer called for intensifying pressure on Russian President Vladimir Putin to force him to end the war in Ukraine. Speaking alongside President Trump on Thursday, Starmer stressed the need for additional pressure on Putin, saying his behavior is far from that of someone who wants peace.
So we've discussed today how we can build our defences further, support Ukraine, and decisively increase the pressure on Putin to get him to agree a peace deal that will last.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said his country's army is carrying out a counteroffensive against Russian forces on the Eastern Front. In remarks on Thursday, Zelensky described the fighting with Russian troops as fierce, particularly around Dobropiliya and Provosk in Donetsk.
We're carrying out one of our counteroffensive operations. Our units are doing a good job. The operation is taking place in the Donetsk region near Bakhmut and near Dobropiliya. In fact, it deprives the occupying forces of the opportunity to launch the large-scale offensive operations they had long planned and were relying on.
Finally, Algeria's Ministry of Culture says Algeria cannot remain silent over the Zionist entity's systematic destruction of Palestinian heritage sites and historical landmarks in a bid to erase Palestinian history and identity. Speaking at the opening of the Arab Cultural Heritage Sessions in Algiers, Culture Minister Malika Bendouda reaffirmed Algeria's commitment to protecting Palestinian heritage, calling it a moral, national, and human duty.
In this context, I cannot overlook the systematic Zionist assaults on Palestinian cultural heritage, where historic sites and monuments have been subjected to widespread destruction. An attempt to erase Palestinian identity and usurp the history of a people rooted in their land for thousands of years. Targeting cultural heritage is not merely an act of vandalism, it is a cultural and humanitarian crime. From this platform, I reaffirm Algeria's steadfast commitment to solidarity with Palestine and its people, and to considering the protection of their heritage a moral, national, and human duty. The convening of this session in Algeria goes beyond being a formal meeting. It stands as a true symbol of a shared Arab will to safeguard heritage and preserve cultural identity.
And that wraps up tonight's edition. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for watching. Have a great night.